Let me introduce myself. My name is Sandra Genera. I am the Puente counselor at Chabot College. I have been doing some equity work with Miss Carmen Johnston, Kristen Land, and Monique Williams. And out of our equity work, we had talked about we need to share some of these conversations that we're having with each other. Our topic today was the ethnic studies major and interview questions to introduce the ethnic studies major and why major in ethnic studies. In today's conversation, I would love for you guys to introduce yourselves, introduce your educational experience, and as well, why did you decide to major in ethnic studies? But we're going to start with Miss Kay Fisher and have her share with us what is ethnic studies and what are ethnic studies classes.
Thanks for having us here, and thanks for thinking of ethnic studies and ethnic studies majors as one of your podcast topics. I think it's always been relevant, but I think especially nowadays there's a lot of attention put on ethnic studies. So I'm excited for this opportunity to kind of just share with everybody, because I think there's a lot of assumptions around what ethnic studies might be, especially amongst people who might have never taken an ethnic studies class before. And then there's a lot of confusion about what ethnic studies is. Sometimes people think it's ethics and it's not. It's a completely different area. Mm-hmm. So I'm here to set the record straight on what is ethnic studies. So ethnic studies is sort of like this broader area, and they're more focused for traditional areas under the umbrella of ethnic studies as an academic field or scholarship area. And so those are African American studies. Sometimes it's Africana studies in some schools, Asian American studies, traditionally Chicano studies, but a lot of those departments have changed to maybe like Chicano/Latino studies, or sometimes it's Latino studies. As of state, it used to be Raza studies, and then they changed it to Latino studies. And then we have Native American studies, also sometimes known as American Indian studies. So those are the four kind of core traditional disciplines under ethnic studies. You also have some programs that offer comparative ethnic studies as a major. And then something that's more burgeoning and coming up in the recent few years has been the growth of Arab American studies under ethnic studies. We see that at San Francisco State, for example. And then in the Bay Area, we do see some of these popping up, including right here at Chabot, where we have a class on Pacific Islands and Oceania studies under the framing of ethnic studies. So what is ethnic studies? It's basically curriculum that centers on the histories and the cultures and the stories and experiences of often resistances and philosophies of basically people of color. People have been racialized as non-white, as lacking access to white privilege, because it's widely acknowledged in ethnic studies that the United States is rooted in white supremacy. And so there was a racial hierarchy that was created. And so anybody who's not white, oftentimes our families' narratives, our struggles, our resistance, our theories, our beautiful ideas and cultural practices have been kind of pushed to the side and not deemed as American, right? And then not kind of centered in what is often considered U.S. history. In ethnic studies, we some scholars, including Ronald Takaki, I know you had him as an instructor, Sandra, but he often used to call that type of American history the master narrative, right? So ethnic studies is sort of a counter to the master narrative. Ethnic studies is also interdisciplinary. It's actually, as far as I know, the only academic field that's come out of student struggle. It came out of students taking over San Francisco State College in 1968 and shutting it down for 5 months, still to this day, the longest student-led strike in the history of the United States. So that's something really should be acknowledged and we should study it more. But so it came out of student struggle, it came out of students going on strike. And so it's a unique and new and fiercely independent academic discipline that came out of struggle. And it's interdisciplinary in that you might have, at the very beginning, we didn't have, it was students who would teach classes, right? And some of them turned into becoming official professors that were hired at the university level. Some of those folks ended up teaching at those universities until they retired. Some still remain, some moved on to other things. But, in the beginning, people came from different backgrounds. So you might have had sociologists and people who are more focused in the arts and humanities. So it's a huge kind of mixture of different types of disciplines that are studied within ethnic studies. I guess I'll say one more thing, if that's okay. I can just babble on forever, but what we put in the definition for ethnic studies at our program at Chabot is that I really wanted to emphasize this, that ethnic studies focuses on the praxis of resistance and liberation, right? It's not just about ideas and theories in our class. We don't just crack open a book, but we apply it to real life. We bring in the community or we go out to the community, and whatever we learn and discuss in the classroom, the ultimate goal is we don't do it for ourselves. We do it for our families, our communities, and we bring back those resources because the objective is through resistance and liberation, we're working towards eliminating all forms of injustice and oppression, right? Definitely along lines of race, class, gender, sexuality, and nationality. So it's about resistance. It's also about agency. It's about solidarity, social justice, self-determination, all those fun words.
Yes, I'm snapping my fingers at you, Kay. This everything that you mentioned resonates with me, and one of the reasons why I was an ethnic studies major at UC Berkeley, or a Chicano studies major at UC Berkeley. And so I'd like to hear how the students have had, what experiences have you had as taking ethnic studies classes and then transferring on to a university. Let's start off with, what kind of ethnic studies courses does Chabot offer, Kay?
We started 5 years ago with a very small list of classes, and there were some history classes that were cross-listed in an effort to kind of bulk up the number of ethnic studies classes that we have. So those classes, even though they're taught under history, are cross-listed with ethnic studies, and I think touch on a lot of these ethnic studies themes, like there's an African American history series, and it used to be called Mexican American history series, but we Professor Juan Pablo Mercado, who's also Chicano studies and ethnic studies major, rewrote those classes and titled it Chicano history. So that's kind of cool. So those series are taught in the history department. So but we also teach our own history classes taught through the ethnic studies department as well. So that's like Asian American history series. Those are the classes that I teach. We have an incredible part-time instructor named Danny Cornejo Warner, who's getting his PhD in Native American Studies from UC Davis, and he teaches the American Indian history class. In addition to that, we have an intro level, kind of just a 101 intro to ethnic studies, which everybody here has taken at Chabot. It might have been their first ethnic studies class at Chabot. Sometimes we teach a minority families in the US. Not a title I chose, but it's still a good class, and we teach it sometimes. If we're able to find an instructor for it, we have taught a Muslim American Studies class, and then we also have Intro to Latinx Studies. A newer class is a Critiquing Race and Gender in Popular Culture, Intro to Pacific Islands and Oceania Studies class, which actually came out of student demand. A Women of Color class, where we look at mainly the intersectionality of race and gender, and then Intro to Asian American Studies.
Thank you. And I know that many of the classes, if all of the classes fulfill general education requirements,
Yes.
And fulfill associate's degree requirements or areas, and it's a growing demand. Thank you very much for growing our ethnic studies program at Chabot College. I feel you've done a fantastic job, and all I hear is great things from the students.
Can I share a little a blurb from an email I just got today from a student?
Yes,
is that okay?
Yes.
Because I just thought I got the permission from the student. Her name's Joy V, goes by Joy, to share this. This is actually her second class she's taken with me, and she's a parent in the Bay Area. And I just thought what Joy V wrote to me was so representative of like emails that I often get from students. So she wrote, I took your class as a requirement, which is pretty common. It starts out that way with a lot of students. But these classes made me realize, and these are her words exactly, that the struggles and obstacles I have encountered in my life was due to systemic racism, and it has ignited in me the want to educate and change injustices in my community. It just really totally, got me in my heart. But students who probably didn't think too much about taking an ethnic studies class. Maybe they were guided by a counselor. Maybe it's because it's a requirement. Maybe it looked interesting. I think there's a variety of reasons why students take ethnic studies classes. But once they take it, they're like, whoa, I'm starting to see the world. I'm starting to see how I fit into the world really differently, because these are things that are not talked about in more mainstream spaces. And it allows you to kind of reflect on that you do have this power to make changes, within your community. And that when you start to see yourself as, the challenges that we face as relating to like these larger systemic and structural forms of oppression, then you start to understand, okay, I can change those, because we can see evidence of like historical moments where people did challenge systemic racism, and there were successful moments, and there were moments that it wasn't so successful. Right. But at least being able to see those, it's life-changing.
And I think it's also a program that it's not you just sitting in a class getting the information, you are engaging in the information that is being shared. So let's go ahead and turn it over to the students. I see Dominic Cedillo in the call with us, and Dominic was one of my Puente students, and he started off as a business major. So we did a student education plan, and he was like, well, yeah, I don't know. And then said, what about ethnic studies? And I said, yes, of course. And so Dominic, let's go ahead and start with you and introduce yourself and share how you came across thinking of ethnic studies as classes and then now as a major.
Oh, my name is Dominic Cedillo. I graduated from Chabot last spring with a AA degree in social justice studies, ethnic studies, and I'll be attending UC Berkeley in the spring. And going into Chabot, I didn't know what direction I wanted to go in, as Ms. Netta articulated. I was just kind of looking around, like for my first semester, the only classes I only took because I know I needed to satisfy my requirements, but I didn't know where my head was at. And it was actually in a sociology class where we went over race and ethnic studies and ethnicities and ethnic groups and how it relates to sociology, where that topic kind of grabbed my attention. And at that same time, I was going through a personal, political evolution. And then I guess as Kwame Ture would put it, a social consciousness, arising. And it was when I read the description of the ethnic studies class coming to apply for spring classes, I was just blown away, because at that time I would be listening to Malcolm X speeches or Kwame Ture or Angela Davis and hearing these things that they're saying, and then looking into ethnic studies and was I think I have to take that class. I think sounds like I would enjoy it. And I think it was probably one of the best decisions of my life, because I would probably be going into that field in the future. But that's originally how I stumbled across ethnic studies classes.
Thank you. Leslie, I know you were recently at Chabot College. What has been your experience in choosing ethnic studies as a major and your transfer experience? And then how did your family react to you choosing ethnic studies as a major?
This is a very interesting question because I think my experience is a little bit unique in the sense that when I transferred in as a poli-sci. So I can talk about that a little bit more. But during Chabot, I specifically took a lot of ethnic studies classes. And as Kay has mentioned, they were cross-listed with sociology and history. All of those were what really inspired me to continue into this sort of path of social justice and creating a better community for my family and just in general for the world. I think I struggled right out of high school into finding where I fit into community college, and ethnic studies was like this really perfect home where I was able to develop myself and develop my passions. And it led me to wanting to become a future lawyer, which then sort of led me into taking some political science classes. I think in general, I wouldn't say that my framework was only political science because of the way I was shaped by ethnic studies. I kind of took everything that I learned from ethnic studies into everything that I do, whether that's in my community or whether that's in essays or in classes. And once I transferred, I found that I didn't really find passion in political science department at Berkeley. So then I switched to legal studies, and I really liked legal studies because it allowed me to take ethnic studies classes and to really like put my framework of ethnic studies into critiquing the legal system of the United States. And I think that's essentially why ethnic studies has been so impactful in my life, because it has allowed me to put all of the things that I have learned, through working multiple jobs, through living in an undocumented household who were farm workers once during the Bracero program. All of these things I didn't necessarily put into theory or put into like these sort of fancy academic terms. But once I took ethnic studies classes, specifically with Kay, I realized that all these experiences accumulated to all the oppression that our community had been going through. And I think that's essentially what guided me into getting an AA in ethnic studies, I believe is called social justice. And then I transferred to Berkeley, where I got my bachelor's degree in legal studies. So I think that was my experience. Talking about ethnic studies courses at home was really interesting because I feel like my family has always been really conscious about oppression, specifically because our family comes from Oaxaca, where it's, deep in poverty in Mexico. And so whether we wanted to or not, we were always very conscious about socioeconomic class back in Mexico and in the United States. And so talking about these, I think it was really interesting at my home because they didn't necessarily know the words ethnic studies or, all of these fancy terms. But when I broke it down and when I told them what I was studying, what I was talking about, it was always about, our family dynamics, our family history, talking about forms of oppression and resistance and how all of these accumulated to how we could basically take all this history and all this knowledge into practice, right? Whether that was going to protest or going to vote or getting more in touch with my Oaxacan roots back home. I think all of these were just conversations that my family really supported and we're really proud to talk about.
Can I add to that, Leslie? That's so beautiful and like empowering to learn that about your family. And it doesn't surprise me one bit because speaking of like, it's not just like these terminologies that we learn in class, right? But these terminologies are based on concept and real lived experiences of ourselves and our families, right? We just put, like you said, a fancy word to it. I like how you said that. But Leslie's family has been involved actually from the get because Leslie, Dominic, and Ashley all here today were not only ethnic studies students, but also actively involved in a student club called the Stay Woke Collective. Leslie and Ashley, from its inception, right? And one of the first campaigns, or kind of sort of part of the reason why Stay Woke Collective came about, was it was, right after Trump got elected, and there was all this coming down, this anti-immigrant, this coming down, and threats from the DOJ against cities and schools that would stand up for undocumented people in the undocumented community and immigrant communities largely. And so students were trying to push for a sanctuary resolution to make our district a sanctuary. And Leslie and Ashley were there from the beginning at every single board meeting and doing testimonies. And Leslie's mom, right? Wasn't it your mom? Correct me if I'm wrong. Invited the media, the Spanish media, and they came and they interviewed. Do you want to? I was like, of course your mom did that. Now that you're telling us a little bit about your family.
Yeah, my mom has always been really supportive and appreciative of the work that I've done in social justice and protesting, even during high school. And we come home and we talk, and we always just talk about what did I do at school. And we always talk about these sort of important conversations. And of course, immigration as a topic is always something that's lingering in the back of our minds. And it's something that is always at the household, whether we wanted to or not. And I talked to her about all the sort of organizing that we were doing with the sanctuary movement at Chabot College, and how we were trying to get the word out, and how we were trying to, put the community into knowledge about what was going on. And I remember, I don't even think she told me. I think she just somehow managed to get the number of Univision, which is like a huge, and she just called them and told them. I think because of just like, I don't know a lot of the terms that we had for the meetings and all the fancy board meeting terms, how to translate that to Spanish. And so sometimes she was like, I think she told me, she called Univision and she was like, I think this is what's happening, but I don't even know. And so she called Univision, and they showed up to Chabot College, and they were like, okay, that's just what's going on. And they were like really surprised. And then they interviewed us. And I just remembered all the board members being so shocked and so confused, and obviously a little intimidated at the amount of publicity that was going on, and of course at the amount of student power that was in the room.
Beautiful. And it's always been, it always comes to the community having the power, right? And community having the power at a community college is just even more impactful, definitely. And so thank you and your family so much for being involved and being part of the community. And bringing the community on campus and putting pressure, like, even though we may not have recognized that that's what we were doing at first, just to highlight, but it's also putting pressure on the institution to say, hey, we're watching for you to do the right thing, right? Because we are your students, we are the constituents, we are the community here. Jocelyn, Ashley, I don't know who wants to share next. How was your experience in upper division baccalaureate programs or courses in ethnic studies? And how did your family receive the news of you becoming an ethnic studies major, or the majors, that you chose?
Yeah, so I actually am what you call a non-traditional student. I ended up at Chabot 11 years after I graduated high school. I had gone to community colleges before. I was an architect major at one point in my life. I was a graphic design major at one point in my life. And then I finally, grew up. I was working, a job that I didn't want to work. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to go back to school. And I realized I can take classes that were requirements, but also take classes that I liked. So I took Ethnic Studies 1, which was my first class, which was Intro to Ethnic Studies, my second semester at Chabot. And it was actually recommended. I was taking Women's History. It was recommended by Professor Wolford, is it?
Mhm.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Oh my God, I'm never gonna forget her. But so I took ethnic studies one, and I loved it. Kay was amazing. And then I was like, you know what? I found something that I like. I'm gonna take another course. I took ethnic studies two. And so I just kept at it. And Kay was like, can you become a tutor? And then I became an ethnic studies tutor. And I really, I had freshly moved to the Bay Area. And so I had to kind of find my community all over again, right? Back home, like my mom works for the school district where we live at. And so everybody knows everybody there. And coming here, I didn't know anybody. So I was like, lost in the sauce. But then I finally was like, okay, like I fit in here. Like, the stuff that we're talking about, I can relate to. These are families like my families, people like me, and so that's how I kind of stumbled into ethnic studies, graduated from Berkeley this past May. Yeah, as an ethnic studies major. I don't think my family, as regards to like my family, I still don't think they understand what ethnic studies is. They know that I come in hot with like all this information, all these topics, like all these conversations. And like, I'm the first person to go to college, higher education. And so they're all for it. But yeah, that was kind of my experience. And then again, I joined Stay Woke, and I really just found my community at Chabot in ethnic studies. Just recently we had like a little picnic with the people that were in ethnic studies that I met at Chabot, like a little reunion, just checking in with each other, which was amazing. So yeah, that's really what ethnic studies has brought me, what Chabot has brought me. I said I was going to be in the Bay Area for like 3 years. I've been here 6 going on 7 now. Like I can't leave it. And that's a big part, a big part of that is Chabot, and a big part of that is ethnic studies. But I'm not going to say too much because Kate, you already know I'm a crybaby. So I'll pass it on to Jocelyn.
But Ashley, let me do a follow-up. What are your next steps?
I actually also want to go to law school. So we'll see. But right now I want to take a break. I just, got out of UC Berkeley, the pandemic. It's just been a lot. And so I would like to give my brain a break for a year or two, especially, so much going on right now. So I was like, you know what, let me just wait. And kind of online learning wasn't really something that I felt I need people, I need community, I need to be around people, and it's so I was like, let me just take a break. But the next step is law school. I'm like set on it. And I'm happy that ethnic studies is a background that I'm coming in with.
But you also work somewhere really cool that's very related to kind of, it's like a bridge between both those.
Yeah, I work at Centro Legal de la Raza in Oakland. Yeah. Straight out of school, I was like, I need to start doing something, and I was previously at Oasis Legal Services, and I was helping translate for people that were seeking asylum, specifically in the LGBTQ community. And that just really opened my eyes to like a lot of work that I would love to do and be a part of. I didn't realize I was a translator my whole life, like this was something that I did, all the time. And I was like, well, let me use that to help people out, And so now I'm at Centro and I love it. Right now I'm on the tenants' rights team. So a lot of our work is surrounding rental assistance. But yeah, it's been amazing. I love Centro as a company as well. Like they're awesome as an organization. They're awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Jocelyn.
Hi, hello. So I'm a current Chabot student. I'm also a transfer to Chabot, and now I'm transferring out again to CSU East Bay in January. And I'm thankful that I'm one of those ethnic studies students that kind of was set on it from high school. I took a class, I think Women in Feminism at James Logan High School like 5-6 years ago now. So I was a freshman then, and I kind of came into it, and I kind of came with the idea of, like what is this other world, this other kind of history, this other kind of just this other curriculum that you don't hear about. Like this is it in practice, rather than just literally opening up a textbook and kind of reading from it and memorizing these things. Like I thought it was really cool that like this stuff that we're talking about now is relevant. It's affecting me as a woman of color, someone that came from like a family of immigrants. So I was really lucky that I found like my passion, my love for it really early on. I'm also really thankful that I have this lens of comparing ethnic studies classes and programs from 3 different institutions now. I was previously at St. Mary's College, my first year of college, so that was 2 years ago now, and it was really good program. I did feel, because it was in a private school setting, it was Catholic, the professors I felt very passionate about what they were teaching, and they wanted to reach out those resources. But it's a very wealthy area, it's a private school, and I feel like there was such a lack of sense of community for me, because I don't come from money. I've never been a private school before. I'm not even that religious. And then transferring to Chabot, it felt more cozy, more like home. One, because it is a community college where I'm from, but also because most of them know what it's like to transfer, start a community college, and go elsewhere. But specifically with the ethnic studies department, I was really lucky to have Kay as my first ethnic studies teacher at Chabot. I think it was women of color class. So it was really nice to see. And for a lot of people, I think that was like an intro class, like their first ethnic studies class, because it's a lower division. And it was really inspiring to see women, across all boards, some with like, they're coming back to school, that have families, that have real, like their careers, but are coming back to school. And they're kind of having that, like, that whoa moment, that flashlight go on over their head. And they're like, wow, I've never really thought of this. Like, I can relate to it so much, what we're reading, what we're talking about, because I am a woman, I'm a grown woman, I'm a woman of color, I'm a woman with children. So I felt really safe in a community and really welcomed in ethnic studies. I've been thankful enough to take classes with also Professor Mercado, who he's guided me a lot and helping me decide specifically I want to go in Chicana studies. So that's specifically the ethnic study I'm going under. And in terms of talking to my family about it, similar to Ashley, I still don't think that they fully understand what it is, but it's nice that they understand like what I'm studying, and that they want to be kind of a part of, okay, well, yeah, well, we're curious. What can you do with that? Where can you go with it? And I think it's just a matter of them understanding like it's interdisciplinary, and that's hard to explain to someone that has not been in a higher education institution and doesn't know what that means or what you can apply it to. So I think it's still a process of like letting them know I don't have to be tied down to one specific thing, because for a lot of first generation students, it's a struggle to explain to your parents something other than a doctor, a teacher, and some of those fields that we see that are so common, that they're like, oh no, we want you to go into this because you can. But specifically, I think it's easier for me because I want to go into education. So I want to be an ethnic studies teacher at the high school level. So I'm waiting to get into those programs when I'm at East Bay, since Chabot doesn't have an education minor. So very exciting. And I think that's easier to explain to a family member or my parents, is I want to teach this. I want to be a teacher of this. And I think I explain it better as saying it's like history, but different. That's the easiest way that I explain it. I say it's really specific and really new, and talks about, I guess, real American history. That's a good way that I explain it. It's a different kind of history, and they kind of understand, because it's a lot of learning about how, these systems came about, how they're put into practice, and how it still affects people today. I like to describe it, I guess, closely as related to history.
Wow, thank you, Jocelyn. This is also a podcast that is talking to professionals as professional development. What advice would you give to teachers or professors?
I'll go. I think some instructors should be more inquisitive, like push the students to like respond in their own way. Because I think if you just take an ethnic studies class with no real interest in it, you're going to just go with the motions, go with the flow. But if you're questioned and you have to really think about some of these issues that we're tackling, I think it could kind of raise a consciousness that some of the students might not know they've had, like Ms. K was sharing the email that she received from a student. I think I haven't really had this experience at Chabot. Most of the professors in ethnic studies have been really inquisitive, really pushing us to just think and give our analysis, right? But some are less inquisitive. Some are more like, here's the topic and this is what we're learning about, and then on to the next one. But I think when you push the students to really think about what they're observing or what they're reading, it could produce some great results. Even if it doesn't push them to want to pursue ethnic studies, it just gives them a natural consciousness. Because for us, ethnic studies is more than just a major. It is actively used in all of our lives. So I think pushing students to really give their own analysis and opinion will help everyday people take ethnic studies and put it into, like, make it a lens that they see life with, even if they're not going to pursue that in their career.
Thank you, Dominic. Anybody else would like to share?
Yeah, I was just gonna echo what Dominic was saying. Totally. And also be open to different styles of like teaching, right? Not everybody learns the same way. The way a STEM class is taught is not the way, ethnic studies is taught. And just be open to different styles of learning, changing things up maybe. I feel like a lot of the times when I was like in these graphic design classes and, other majors that I thought I was going to be in, like I lost interest because this is how it is and this is how it's going to be, right? And in ethnic studies, it's completely different. There's so many ways to learn and so many ways to produce work. It's not just like one way, right?
Yes, yes, thank you. That just about wraps up our time, but I want to say two things. One, can you, if there's any other thought that you want to share? And then just do somebody that we should study.
Could I add on when they talked about like talking to future students? And I think reflecting on one of the questions that was we received is like, should other students receive major in ethnic studies? And I would say that ethnic studies, I don't think it's for everybody. I think ethnic studies is for people who, like Miss K said, they want to better people's lives, but not in the cliche sense, in the abstract sense, but like what you said, praxis, like in the practical sense of bettering people's material conditions. I think ethnic studies is like the perfect lane to do that and to study it and to apply it in your career if that's the way you're going. And in the sense of it's praxis because you're going to learn about these minority groups, and some of these issues go across racial and ethnic lines, like working class issues. So I think ethnic studies offers a lane to do that. And then to what Ms. Netta said, another personal add is I think one person that I don't think I've ever gone over in an ethnic studies class, which is surprising, is Fred Hampton. And I think he's a person who's not overlooked. Just since he died really young, he was assassinated very young. I think he's a person that should be highlighted in more ethnic studies classes.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you. Leslie?
I think in general, what I would say to people or anybody about ethnic studies is that, like Dominic mentioned, it is really about not only studying forms of oppression, but I think what's even more exciting and even more important is how to resist that and how to come together as a community. And I think that's very important in nowadays, because I feel like, these are troubling times, and I think we often focus on the negative parts. And of course, as a little person in this huge universe, it feels very difficult to put that into perspective of how I can personally, right, affect all forms of oppression and injustice. But of course, when you put that into perspective in ethnic studies and community work and coming together, it really becomes something beautiful. And I think that's what really gravitated me towards ethnic studies. I think one person that really was influential to me, and I don't think is talked about enough, but I think is becoming a bit more recognized, which I'm really happy about, is Larry Itliong. Larry is just so important. I think for me growing up, I, of course, heard only about Cesar Chavez, and it was kind of almost idolized. And when I heard about just the actual history of Cesar Chavez points of views of, anti-immigrants and just in general, essentially what I would say is not necessarily being in community with all the Filipino farm workers as much as he should have been, I argue. I think that it really opened my eyes to sort of what should be done in the future and what should be looked at, and in retrospect of what we should be doing. And I think Larry Itliong is just someone that I look up to because of just how he was always within community and was always passionate about the work he was doing. And I think I really admire all of the Filipino farm workers and all their involvement in the United Farm Workers Movement and in the grape protests.
Thank you, Leslie. Ashley?
Yeah, I'm gonna keep it short and sweet. I encourage people to take an ethnic studies course. That is my my little piece of advice, just take an ethnic studies course. I have yet to meet someone that did not enjoy their ethnic studies class. Even at Berkeley, there's people that were in my class that were like, I love ethnic studies. I'm like, yeah, you should totally major in it. Like, but yeah, that would be my piece of advice. And someone that, it's actually two, but they're kind of a unit. So Melanie Cervantes and Jesus Barraza and Dignidad Rebelde. That is who Kay introduced me to when I was a graphic design major. And I was like, but if I'm ethnic studies, like, what am I going to do? And then she was like, well, there's this. And she showed me a poster and I was like, okay, like I can do something, with this major and what I really want to do. And although I still love these things like art and stuff, ethnic studies is where my heart is. And I just feel like a prime example of how you can do these things, of liberation and resistance through art, right? Through something that nobody, it's non-traditional, I guess you can say, right? So yeah, he was also one of my professors at Berkeley, which is amazing. Their story is awesome. So I feel like that's someone that we should definitely be learning about in ethnic studies.
Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah.
Jocelyn?
I think, yeah, take an ethnic studies class, challenge yourself, see what you learn, because you will learn something. You're going to take something away from it if you really try. And I think you'll learn a lot about yourself and see like where your passions lie, or, see things through a different lens that you haven't seen before. So to try an ethnic studies class, I think someone that I personally learned about this semester that I thought needs more recognition. And in general, I think because we live in California and in the Bay Area specifically, we focus a lot on Mexican American like studies, and I think it goes beyond that. When we say Chicano studies, we mean Puerto Rican, Cuban, Afro Latinos, all of that. So I love that it's getting more ingrained, and I love learning about groups like the Young Lords in New York. They were like a group that a lot of people, they were more artistic and they were similar kind of to the Black Panthers. I think those are in the same era of wanting more for their community, for the Puerto Ricans in New York, and being recognized not as only like a subgroup of Mexicans and brown people, but as, themselves as people that are Puerto Rican, that are also immigrants, that have different cultures and different needs. And they ultimately just wanted better for their people and their community. And they're still recognized in New York. And I know they have a lot of their art still on display, I think, in their own kind of museum, last time I heard. So
Thank you, Jocelyn. Any final words, Miss Kay Fisher?
I want to kind of piggyback off of what Jocelyn said earlier about how when students come into an ethnic studies classroom, I think a lot of ethnic studies practitioners have read Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. I think a lot of educators that are interested in social justice education have, and his whole philosophy is that human beings are not vessels, right? Empty vessels to be filled, banked with knowledge. Human beings come with culture, experience, perspectives, history, and all students come into the classroom with so much knowledge and so much experience. I think, as Jocelyn said earlier, you already know this stuff, right? Like if you are a student listening to this podcast, never taken an ethnic studies class before, you already know this stuff. It's just, we're engaging in material that is perhaps giving a word to something that you've already experienced, or your experience is being validated because you're seeing that other people have gone through what you've gone through and you're not alone. Or it may be that your experience and your point of view is being challenged. And that's a good thing, for what we assume to be real or just a matter of fact to be challenged. That's how we all grow. That's how we learn. And that's what's, I think, the core of a lot of, ethnic studies philosophies and courses. So I always, kind of reflect every semester about, how much I've been able to have the opportunity to grow and learn from my students, from stories students tell in class. We have an oral history assignment, which is like one of my favorite things. And it's like the same themes a lot, and sometimes a really unique story, but still the same themes, and the incredible things that, your family members overcome and still persevere and still have hopes and dreams. It's a lot. It should be turned into movies and books, and we should be, listening to all of your family members, right? And like following the way that people have struggled and persevered, and it's really inspiring. And so I just feel very lucky to be able to be put in this situation, and grateful every day for the relationships that I form with my students and what I learn from them in the classroom. So thank you for this opportunity, Sunday. It was really fun.
Thank you very much for coming in and talking with us.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
It's so nice to
Thank
see
you.
you.
Nice to
You
see
people
you.
too.
And good luck, Dominic and Jocelyn over at Berkeley and
you.
East
Thank
Bay. And
I'm
when
so
you guys are ready
excited.
for law school applications, let us know, and we're here for you guys.
You